Left behind and forgotten. That is the fate of those stranded on foreign soil after the Great War. Most have long since perished, others can be found waiting patiently to go home, and in some cases, they have disbanded to create a new life. In 2 hours, humanity was reduced to almost nothing. This event was known as the Great War. The majority of those fighting this war were left without leaders, without structure, and those on foreign soil left wondering if there's even a home to go back to. One instance of Chinese soldiers stranded behind enemy lines is the naval crew of the Shi Huangti, which washed ashore on the beaches of San Francisco shortly after the Great War. The crew had no choice but to head inland to scavenge and came across the remnants of Chinatown. Seeing the architecture and other such features reminiscent of their homeland gave them comfort, and it was soon decided that this would be their new home. Parts were taken from the wrecked submarine and used to construct what they called the palace. The descendants of the naval crew, now known as the Shi, still inhabit the palace, and they really do deserve their own dedicated video, not as remnants of a fallen empire, but as the Shi, a new faction forged from the old world. After the dust had settled, many companies that once served as fronts for the Chinese government were left to fend for themselves. Inside Mama Dolce's, a pre-war food distribution company, are Chinese remnants, spies and special forces still loyal to the regime. For 200 years they have remained operational, waiting for further instructions from their leaders, no matter how long that may take. Not all fronts continued to function after the Great War. One such case is L.O.B. Enterprises. It is unknown what the company did while it was being watched, but when they weren't, employees worked tirelessly developing a new incendiary weapon, formerly known as Project Zhurong, a unique fire-breathing pistol. Rumors of the company's true intentions soon spread throughout the area, and the employees were treated with suspicion by both American citizens and law enforcement. In response to this treatment, the employees were authorized to carry low-grade military weapons, receive training for those weapons, and were taught what to do in the case of a federal invasion and even nuclear war. Although the latter was mostly filling out paperwork, taking iodine tablets, and being sworn into the sovereign L.O.B. Republic, their activity was soon discovered through their trading with another front by the name of Happy Liberty Imports. This led to the US military invading the building and killing all those inside that refused to surrender. All that remains of this operation is a handful of terminal entries, a band of roaming US Army robots, and a Chinese pistol possessing the ability to spit fire. Not all remnants can hold on to hope for 200 years and continue believing that there is more to life than waiting and wishing to go home. Inside the drainage chamber beneath broadcast Tower KT8 are the bodies of 2 Chinese spies. Surrounding them is a Chinese Spec Ops training manual and a ham radio, which they would have used desperately trying to contact their leaders back in mainland China. It is unknown if they managed to do so, but what is known is that they ceased to exist, having taken their own lives, most likely in the form of a cyanide capsule, a common tool used by Chinese spies to avoid interrogation. Speaking of broadcast towers and ham radios, the People's Republic of America radio continues spouting propaganda over 200 years later, heard at both Mama Dolce's and nearby the Citadel. The broadcast is in English and talks of the Anchorage Reclamation and the Wall Street Gang, showing just how outdated the looping message really is. The origin of this broadcast was to break the morale of American soldiers and citizens alike, hoping to convert them into loyal subjects. Other broadcasts are left over from a more recent time, such as the one that can be heard when crossing paths with the fallen Chinese commando, whose broadcast when translated to English means to win every battle, although his battle with gravity appears to be a losing one. Along with the appearance of Chinese remnants, there are several specific Chinese training manuals that appear to have a deeper meaning. At the entrance to the flooded metro stands a Pulowski preservation shelter. Inside is a training manual, 2 grenades, stimpaks, and the skeleton of what I believe is a Chinese spy that tried surviving the end of the world in what is essentially a talking tin can. At the atrium of the Nuka-Cola bottling plant is another training manual, this one found inside the filing cabinet protruding through the floor above. Was an employee a Chinese spy? If so, what could they have possibly learned from a corporation that bottles soda? Were they going to add something to the bottling process to alter the consumer's opinion of their own government? Or am I just overthinking the placement of a skill book? Deep in the wasteland is the SATCOM array NW05A tower. Inside is a Chinese training manual and a ghoul scientist. Was this ghoul a pre-war spy who still continues to gather data for a dead nation, or was the training manual given to the scientist to translate Chinese signals passing through the area? And let's not forget the Chinese jumpsuit, hat, assault rifle, and manual inside the Taft tunnels, directly beneath the Citadel, which was once the Pentagon, the pre-war headquarters for the Department of Defense, which just goes to show how deeply implanted China's fingers really were. Perhaps the most well-known Chinese spy is Wan Yang. Other aliases include Five Claw Dragon, Jamie Patrick, Maria Lopez, and Stanley Derrick. Despite the many names and personas, the odds were not in her favour, and she was swiftly captured by the Defense Intelligence Agency and sent to the Turtledove detention camp. The camp is still standing, once used to detain suspected Chinese spies allegedly working against the US. The conditions of the camp are less than favourable: no running water, Spartan bunks with minimal space, fencing, watchtowers, searchlights, and even security robots patrolling the perimeter day and night. As you would expect, many died from the poor living conditions and neglectful treatment received from the few human soldiers guarding the camp. The bodies quickly filled the camp's mortuary, Wan Yang's included, leading to the frequent use of the camp's crematorium. It would seem that approximately 1 week before the Great War, the prisoners had had enough and fought back. While most died in the fighting, a small group of them was able to escape through the morgue's draining channel. What happened to those that escaped is unknown. They most likely tried finding their families, provided they were wrongfully imprisoned, while those that were in fact spies likely headed to the nearest safe house to report their findings. Today, the camp is a disheveled husk, mirrored only by those left behind after the Great War. Ghouls, both American and Chinese, completely indiscernible from one another, roam the camp together. Below the shallow waters of the coast is a Chinese submarine that was once used to observe the military officials at the Turtledove detention camp and the Naval Recruiting Center. Their mission was a failure, as American forces swiftly captured the submarine and commanding crew, although only 2 crew members are ever mentioned, both nameless except for the rank of captain, and another coined John Doe. The inside of the submarine is fairly small, with only enough space to accommodate 2 bunks, which could have been for both the captain and crew member, but they could have alternated sleeping patterns around the clock, with as many as 4 members taking shifts and sharing bunks to preserve space. There seems to be no signs of any defensive weapons, no missile hatches or torpedo launch tubes in sight. This is because the crew was given strict orders to only ever collect data, and should they come into contact with the enemy, initiate the self-destruct sequence, although for whatever reason, the crew was unable to do so. Upon being captured by enemy forces, the captain used a cyanide capsule stored in his tooth to commit suicide. John Doe, the unnamed crew member, tried following his captain to the other side, but failed due to his own cyanide capsule being a dud. This led to his imprisonment at the Turtledove detention camp, where, after a lengthy and thorough interrogation, he was executed for his crimes. Jiang was a Chinese spy who willingly turned himself over to the American forces stationed at Point Lookout. He voluntarily gave the enemy information about the captured submarine in return for his freedom. This may have been a common occurrence among Chinese spies that were done taking orders, but Jiang had an ulterior motive. He was a double agent, merely pretending to help the Americans while aiming to destroy the submarine. His mission was over before it had even begun, thanks to the Great War. His remains can be found inside the Homestead Motel. Little did he know that even if his mission was completed, his fate was to remain the same. Through the use of a special code and cryptochromatic spectacles, the entrance to a secret intelligence bunker belonging to the Chinese can be opened. This is where Agent Jiang was supposed to report once his mission was complete. Instead of meeting other Chinese operatives like he may have expected, a protectron would have been waiting in their stead, who, after receiving a code word, would have taken him downstairs to receive his extraction orders. This was all, of course, a lie. He was never meant to be extracted, instead executed through the means of poisonous gas. Imagine remaining loyal, risking life and limb for your leaders, only to be disposed of. I understand that the last person you're going to trust is a double agent, but Jiang deserved better. Chinese remnants are extremely limited in the Mojave Wasteland. Other than 2 sets of Chinese stealth armor at Hoover Dam, a few scattered manuals found throughout the map, and the Yangtze War Memorial, there isn't all that much to even suggest that the two countries were at war. But one of the DLCs tells a different story. The Big Empty is home to Little Yangtze, a concentration camp built to house relocated Chinese Americans. Little did these prisoners know that the camp was less of a prison and more of a holding cell for what they would soon realize were test subjects, grotesquely titled as a human farm by the scientists of the think tank. During the very first day of operation, the human farm was ripe with subjects, 3 trainloads to be precise. The majority of these Chinese Americans had limited speech in terms of English, leading to the camp guards treating them with more suspicion. Inmates were soon being abducted for research purposes and brain extractions, some of which you may still see roaming the crater, albeit with a new body. The fear of being the next inmate to be abducted, violent encounters with the guards, and poor living conditions, if you could call it living, soon led to inmates trying to escape, so much so that the guards had to work triple shifts in order to keep up. As a result of the guards' abilities being stretched to breaking point, the camp commander ordered for the prototype explosive collars the scientists had been working on to be immediately fixed to the necks of all prisoners, which reduced escape attempts to a minimum and restored control back to the guards. This left the prisoners with the options of becoming the next test subject or death. What could have been the saving grace to those wanting to still live was the Great War. Shortly after the bombs had finished falling, the military abandoned the Big Empty, leaving behind the prisoners who were still inside their cage with bomb collars around their necks. Those that didn't starve to death became ghouls, transformed by the radioactive fallout carried on the wind. This extended their lives, but they were still unable to leave because of the explosive collars. For 2 centuries, these survivors have waited, fighting among themselves and hoping to go home. And then one day, after all that time, someone found them. But he was not to be their savior as they might have hoped. Instead, this man, Elijah, a rogue elder from the Brotherhood of Steel, was only interested in reverse engineering the bomb collars, and once he had, he too left, leaving the ghouls with little to no hope of ever leaving little Yangtze alive. Bobbing on the coast of Boston is the Yangtze 31, a Chinese nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. Before the Great War, the submarine was sent to patrol the US Atlantic coast, carrying 6 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. This sub is unlike the others seen so far. Those were either unknown or merely constructed for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. This submarine was built for war. When the Great War began, the captain followed his orders to launch all missiles, reducing the Commonwealth to a wasteland. Shortly after the missiles were fired, the Yangtze 31 was severely damaged after hitting a sea mine. The reactor was compromised and left the crew with no choice other than to seek refuge in Boston Harbor. The crew was stranded, and thanks to the damaged reactor, which filled the sub with radiation, the crew either died from radiation sickness or were transformed into ghouls. The captain of the Yangtze 31 is the only remaining crew member still possessing the ability to reason. 200 years of isolation has taken its toll, but his will is not broken. Surfacing only to scavenge for what little there is, and fighting off the descendants of the land he helped scorch, keeps him sane, and may be one of the reasons he has yet to turn feral. Patiently he waits, wishing to return home, but he also wishes for the strength to put his crew to rest. One thing you rarely get to witness in Fallout is the opinion of what those directly involved in the Great War actually think about the mutually assured destruction. Zhao is remorseful, plagued with both radiation and guilt, regretting the damage and destruction he has unleashed upon the Commonwealth. The sole survivor who once served for the other side can do what would have been considered treason by his long-past superiors. They can relieve the crew from their duties, assist the captain, and give him the long-awaited opportunity to return home. We already know of the Mama Dolces back in the capital wasteland, where Chinese spies once pretended to uphold the values and traditions of American society, when, in reality, they were gathering intelligence. This food processing facility is no different. Beneath the cutesy name and the promise of sweet treats is a deep, dark secret. The Fujiniya intelligence base, led by Station Chief Shi, was only a piece of a far grander operation known as Trinitite. Their mission was to infiltrate and destroy American nuclear silos in the West Virginia area. Due to the importance of their mission, they could not afford failure. To maintain secrecy, security was on high alert, ID badges were mandatory, operatives were subjected to random searches, and those found carrying contraband received corporal punishment. Those suspected of being a double agent were interrogated for counterintelligence, and within 12 hours of being detained, were executed. The operatives who could be trusted encountered many issues with their mission, reassigning resources to other projects that they believed would be more promising, exploring Watoga for useful technology, the inclusion of new laboratories focused on developing new cloaking and stealth-based technologies, as well as robotics, whose researchers focused on revamping the notorious liberators that still roam the wasteland to this day. These ambitious projects were mostly thwarted. Attempts to infiltrate the nuclear silos proved unsuccessful due to the mechanized army guarding the perimeter and the very limited opportunities to enter the premises. The new cloaking and stealth-based technology had logistical issues, receiving very little of what was needed due to the war effort, combined with limited workspace and working hours due to the secrecy of the project, meant very little progress was ever achieved. To make things even harder, over half the outsiders they could find to help, and more importantly, they could trust, were killed by the facility's security due to not having the correct credentials, reducing the facility's success even further. The only real achievement made within the facility was the improvements to the Liberator robot. The new model was deadlier, inexpensive to manufacture, and easy to deploy. Given additional time, the base could have achieved more, but progress was halted altogether by the Great War. Operatives stationed inside were given no warning and were left to fend for themselves. Station Chief Shi figured the party leaders were all gone, leaving any and all remaining agents to act independently. In response, or lack of, Shi ordered all agents to abandon their posts and attempt to blend in with the locals, as he believed this was their best chance of survival. Those that remained had not seen the end of their troubles, as the Enclave soon discovered their presence and stormed the facility. The Chinese operatives who refused to surrender were overpowered and executed. The facility's contents were transferred to external servers for analysis, and local servers wiped clean. If not for the few remaining flags and personal notes, you would have never guessed the Chinese had even been here. The remains of a Chinese scientist from the Fujiniya intelligence base can be found during a random encounter. Following orders to leave his post and blend in with the local populace was almost impossible for him to endure, having to surround himself by the very people he aimed to destroy. Eventually, the scientist stopped interacting with Americans altogether. His only wish was to be home in China. This was of course impossible, and he knew it, which led to him asking his comrades for forgiveness before taking his own life. An elaborate cave system chosen by communist infiltrators as the ideal base location for the Motherlode interception operations. Somehow the station has evaded detection despite its close proximity to the White Spring bunker. But this says more about the infiltrators than anything else. Their secrecy is down to strict security measures, including the orders to shoot anyone without clearance. Those stationed here at the time of the Great War have transformed into ghouls over the course of 25 years, and they continue to pursue their mission without any hope of returning home. One such agent found at the deep is Mochu, a former spy for the People's Liberation Army. Before the Great War, her entire life was spent training for a singular purpose: to work alongside other Chinese operatives against the American war effort. She was fiercely loyal right up until the bombs fell, but then something happened. Mochu began to think for herself. She realized that both America and China had misled their people. They had manipulated them into killing one another and ruining their land for generations to come. Mochu had had enough. She saw the nuclear holocaust not as the end of her life, but as the beginning of a new one where she could follow her own orders, and for years that is exactly what she did. Mochu went on to create a new life with her husband, who was also a former Chinese spy, and they had a daughter named Jen. Everything seemed to be going well until another pre-war asset loyal to the Chinese government had tracked her down through a tracer in her stealth suit. The asset gave her an ultimatum: follow orders or die. Not wanting to risk her family's lives, she disappeared and fled to Appalachia, where she awaits her fate at the hand of the Resident. To be left behind, forgotten, or in some cases pursued and forced to serve is a burden they have to bear. Some have waited centuries to fulfill their purpose, others try to run from it, and some simply can't take another day. They have suffered for their actions, and now they seek forgiveness or to protect the only ones they have left. Being stranded from home in a foreign land has got to be the most difficult thing for a soldier, a spy, a remnant of a shattered empire. Be sure to show your support by liking the video and subscribing if you haven't already for more Fallout content. If there's anything you would like to see in a later video, leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. With that said, thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.